The cats I interview have been making a living on and off the bandstand for the last half century. They have dealt with good leadership and bad. They have come to different understandings of what love is. They have overcome a lot of adversity in their lives, and they are adept at playing all musics. For me nowadays, labels and names have really gotten in the way of our ability to create communal, spiritual music. The bean counters want to pigeonhole and brand music. The Cats have had an impact on so many records that my generation and older generations have lived off for years. They play little parts and serve the song as conduits for information from the heavens. For the most part, the Cats had a chance to play with the original masters of the music and learn to get out of their own way to become part of the musical conversation. One thing I've realized and been humbled by is the opportunity that has been given to me to gain knowledge and wisdom from the musicians, whose tales I share with people in all parts of the world via the internet. Call it mass distance education, if you will. I have the opportunity to talk with individuals who have been on this earth longer than myself, have experienced societal shifts, and have invented and reinvented themselves in different musical settings in different parts of the country. Elliot Cahn, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you. That was quite an introduction.
I realized that I really wanted to talk to you about, before your professional career started, the first time that you started to really hear the word rock being described as a type of music.
Probably out of the mouth of Chuck Berry when I was a little kid. Just let me hear some of that rock and roll music,
it was funny because I was I did an interview with Artie Kornfeld yesterday, and he said that, for a minute that there was, trying to look here, he said that Alan Freed came up with the saying, rock and roll is here to stay, and Morris Levy put an injunction on that, saying no one could use rock and roll in any song, so it took about 12 years for someone to file a lawsuit and win. You know what I'm trying to get at is that I come from the Duke Ellington School of Music, and at 45 years old, it just drives me insane about the incessant branding and labeling of music. And I just wonder if were you obsessed with labels as a kid, or did that?
No, I just loved the music. I was unaware of who wrote it or who was playing on it. It was just, I was just enthralled from a really early age. I had a little crystal radio, the shape of a 4-inch rocket, and the nose cone had a little dial, and that's how you found like the one or two radio stations that was strong enough to pick up, and I would just hide under my sheets at night pretending to be asleep, just absolutely loving every note I heard.
That story's been told to me many times by many people. Who was it? Harry Abramson? What were the bleed-through stations you were listening to?
Actually, I was in Boston, and it was the disc jockey was Arnie Woo Woo Ginsburg.
Oh, here we go, dude.
Who was my absolute hero.
Arnie Woo Woo Ginsburg. This is Arnie so beautiful, man.
Yeah.
Jesus, my God.
Look him up. He was a crazy man.
And what station was he on?
Well, he was on, first of all, he was on WBOS 1600, and then I guess they changed their format, and he went to WMEX.
Can you talk a little bit about, at night, the format? I mean, was he, and I guess it goes back to this idea of, this was before really like free-form radio or album-oriented rock. I'm just curious about the variety of and the different kinds of tunes, even though you didn't care who it was. Looking back, what kind of variety were you getting a chance to listen to?
There was a lot of stuff like Chuck Berry and Little Richard and Jerry Lee Lewis, and then a lot of doo-wop songs by groups that sort of came and went. Very few of them had more than one or two hits, and then they disappeared. But then there was a little bit of country crossover mixed in. And,
I
didn't know what a country song was or what it wasn't.
Wait, what about jazz? I mean, Boston was a bastion of bop music. Was there jazz going on?
There was jazz going on. I was not really much aware of it until maybe I was 12 or so, 11. And I had an older brother who was a big jazz fan. So all of a sudden started listening to Miles and Coltrane and Charlie Parker, Stan Getz.
Were you, I guess there's a kind of a a question that, like, at that point, were you at 12 years old, were you able, there was a peanut gallery, where cats could go in, and even if they were underage, there'd be like a cordoned off section where you could get a Coke and, you watch Dizzy, and this is at Birdland or even at the Black Hawk in San Francisco. Was there a place like that in Boston? Because to me, kids were in the clubs when you were coming up.
Well, I sure wasn't. I don't think I went to a concert of any kind until I was probably 14 or 15. I think the first big concerts I ever went to were at the Newport Folk Festival, where I went 2 or 3 times.
That was those were your first exposure. I guess that was probably, were you at the legendary Lomax fisticuffs with Dylan's manager over a drum kit on the stage?
You know what? I was at the Newport Folk Festival that weekend, and that show was Sunday night, and I was gone by then. Who knew? But what I did see, which I thought was amazing. Well, first of all, I saw the London Spoonful. It was the first rock band I'd ever seen play live. And there they were at the Newport Folk Festival. And in one of the afternoons, they had big concerts at night. And in the afternoon, a lot of the same performers who would play at night would play, workshops in front of much smaller audiences where everybody would sit on a bale of hay. And who knows? This is a 58-year-old memory, but
I love this.
I kind of remember an afternoon concert with Richie Havens and Tim Hardin and Eric Anderson.
Oh, my God. Are you kidding me?
No, all playing together. I'd never heard of any of them before. And Harvey Brooks, bass player.
Yeah, a dear friend, yeah. Unbelievable, yeah.
And my recollection, at least, is that he, played with all of them. And I'd never heard of him before, never seen him before, and I just was blown away. Because I had sort of lost my taste for rock and roll in the early 1960s because it just got really cheesy from my perspective. And so I became a big folk music fan. And then when the two art forms merged, when Dylan did it in one fell swoop, and all of a sudden just two kinds of music that I loved came together, and I was in heaven.
That, it's such an honor to talk to Elliot Cahn here. Okay, so I want to be clear. You were pretty young in the late 50s, but I do want you to talk to the audience about the reason rock music got real cheesy was because of that payola scandal, where you had, at least that was one of the factors, where you had, them whitewashing all this raunchy R&B music or rock music.
Well, that's certainly part of it. I'm teaching a rock and roll history class right now in Asheville, North Carolina. And one of the things I did was talk about white cover records of R&B classics.
I love this. Please talk about this. Yeah.
There's a particularly, Pat Boone had, in addition to being a crooner, sort of did white cover versions of a bunch of R&B songs. And he's got a particularly egregious version of Long Tall Sally, where he changed the lyrics, because at its cleanest, Long Tall Sally is about infidelity, and it may well be about transgender stuff.
Sure.
Unclear, but at the very least, it's about marital infidelity, and he changed the lyrics to take that theme totally out of the song. There's no gonna tell Aunt Mary about Uncle John. Nope, gone. So, that probably had part to do with it, but then I think it just sort of ran out of steam for a couple of years, and all of a sudden you have, little Peggy Marsh doing I Love Him, and Where He Goes I'll Follow being #1 songs.
Can you talk a little bit like just for the audience? I mean, you teach this. Do you talk about the payola scandal?
Just a little bit. Mostly, I talk about the music.
I dig, but I'm saying like, what was the catalyst for? The idea was that whether it was Hank Ballard and the Midnighters, or Little Richard or Fats Domino. I mean, was it again just the idea of this sort of thing in our country about we can't let people of color get too out in front here, and we have to whitewash the music? I mean, I guess it's just, to me, Little Richard found God at that time. Elvis went to the army. It was a vapid time. David Grisman said the same thing to me. But I mean, I feel like this is an obvious answer, but was there a racial component to that?
Undoubtedly. And, I'm just trying to think about what the record companies were thinking at the time, which is that there are certain radio stations, probably especially in the South, that won't play records by black artists. So we're going to homogenize it somewhat and make it more acceptable. And we'll also do white sanitized versions of country records too, where the singer doesn't have a twang in his voice. So there was a ballad called Young Love that was done by an artist named Sonny James. And about a week after that one started hitting the radio stations, out came a version by Tab Hunter, who was this, incredibly good-looking young would-be movie star who sang like a crooner, like Perry Como. So they put that one out, and it was even bigger record than Sonny James' version. So it wasn't totally racial. It was a question of how do we shoehorn something into a container that's somehow more acceptable to a broad base of white America.
And in terms of folk music, before Dylan merged the two styles, was it the Kingston Trio? What were some of the, so many of those cats, and I don't, I mean, I was born long after they ever, were on the bandstand. But the thing that marvels me, I don't care if it's Pete Seeger or the Kingston Trio. I mean, those guys gave back to the music community. The Kingston Trio had this incredible studio that they bought and in San Francisco, and they were just paying it forward. Did that come across? I mean, that sort of generosity and spirit in the folk scene, was that appealing? Or, I mean, it wasn't like they were it wasn't riffology or chops, it was just honest folk singing, great songs. But did you pick up on that sort of spirit of generosity and paying it forward?
I totally did. And one of the interesting things to me, just thinking forward a little bit, I'm just going to mention two artists. One of them is Tom Rush.
Yes.
Folk singer from Boston.
One of my heroes. I love him, dude.
Yeah. The first time, he had one album with 3 covers by songwriters I had never heard of before. And one of them was Joni Mitchell, and one of them was James Taylor, and one of them was Jackson Browne. And I remember looking at the liner notes, which I did religiously, and looking and going, I never heard of any of these people before. I wonder if they've done anything else.
That was his first. That was his first album. Really? That was his first album?
No, it wasn't his first album.
Yeah.
It was his third or fourth.
Third or fourth album. Got it. Yeah.
Yeah. Judy Collins, whose voice I totally fell in love with. She did a version of Turn, Turn, Turn. And one of the studio musicians in that session was this guy named Jim McGuinn.
Wow.
Soon to become Roger McGuinn, who probably heard that song for the first time in that recording session, and it stuck in the back of his mind.
So, and that speaks to the sort of sharing of music. That was the sort of aesthetic of the folk scene, was to be inspired by other artists, play their tunes, turn them upside down. And I mean, the Meters did that in New Orleans with Stephen Stills tunes. I mean, they'd slow the tempo down. But, just popped into my head. I mean, was Elliot Cahn toiling around Auburn 47, Club 47, Cambridge,
Yes.
I need you to talk a little bit about, because like Peter Rowan was talking to me about, there'd be, you know, uh, guys with conga drums showing up. I mean, Joan Baez was there. Obviously, it became a folk club, but before it was actually like a jazz trio. Can you talk a little bit about the vibe there and ultimately?
Great vibe, but I'm going to talk about something just a smidge different.
Please.
There was a club in Hyannis, Massachusetts, on Cape Cod, of all places.
Oh my God!
In a little A-frame, there was a fast food, fried clam place during the day, and at night a folk music club. Except the people there were really good. And at one time there was a jug band playing, and just a bunch of people mostly playing covers, but in the jug band was a drummer who became Country Joe and the Fish's drummer, Greg Dewey.
Whoa.
The guy that became the first, lead guitarist in the Youngbloods. And two guys who formed a group called Orpheus that had a couple of hits.
Yes. Wait, hold on for a sec. Wait. Who's the lead guitar cat? It wasn't Banana, right?
No, it wasn't Banana. It was...
Yeah. No, it just popped into my head, and then
Jerry Corbett.
Wow, you're telling. What was the name of this clam shack?
It was called the Carousel, I think.
Out in Cape Cod.
Yeah, and I was just learning how to play the guitar, and I would go every night I could with a little, like a piece of paper, like a little, spiral notebook, and I would just sort of look and go, "Holy shit!" and write things down. Oh, look at this! How do you do that? And write it down. So I was enthralled.
So I want to get your definition. You're saying there was a trap drummer in that band, the original Country Joe band, but the guy was playing in a jug band with a trap.
He was playing washboard.
He's playing washboard.
Yeah. So you have like a washboard on, a string that you have like in front of you, and you put thimbles on your fingers. And you play rhythm now.
Oh, absolutely. Well, the cat that James Jamerson loved to play with the most in Detroit was a guy named Washboard Willie, who was apparently legendary cat. But, can you talk about what is the sort of aesthetics in your mind of? You said you saw the Love and Spoonful, and that was the first rock show you saw live.
Yeah.
Now, when you say what made it rock and not? Sebastian was as folky as you could get. So what made it?
Yeah, but all of a sudden he had a drum kit, and an electric bass player, and an electric guitar player, and he came out playing auto harp at the very beginning. Do You Believe in Magic had an auto harp in it, and that's what he was playing.
So rock is basically, you would say plugging. It sounds self-explanatory, but plugging in is and having a drum kit. You think that those are the keys?
And that beat,
right?
Like something with a backbeat, with the accents on the twos and the fours.
Did you get a chance to see anyone like? Before you left Boston, did you see people like John Coltrane play or Miles?
No. I think, interestingly enough, I think that the first really good jazz group I ever saw was Weather Report.
Oh, the original cat,
with Joe Zawinul. Yeah, this was probably when Wayne Shorter was in it. This was maybe 73 or so.
You're right. I'm just wondering if Miroslav Vitous was playing the original, because that was. For a minute when they first started, they were playing places like after the Gaslight went from folk house, it became like. They were playing acoustic, Weather Report played the Gaslight in 71, 72, which is just so hard for me to even fathom. But so ultimately, you were learning guitar, you were going to the clam shack, you had your notebook, and did you want to pursue a career?
No, I never even thought about it. Seriously, music was just something I loved, and it was an avocation for me. And I loved singing. I loved singing harmonies with people who had good ears, and that's what I did. And then, basically the first time I ever played professionally in a band was Sha Na Na.
Right. This is fast. So the impetus to move. What was the impetus to move to New York?
We're going to college
At Columbia.
at Columbia. Yeah.
Okay. So when you sort of went in with a sort of did you had declared major, or you do sort of an open? You kind of went in.
I had about 4 or 5 different majors in the 2.5 years I was there. I was a terrible student.
Well, now clearly you weren't if you got into Columbia, but I mean, the.
No. I mean, I'm talking about in terms of the product I produced. I was a terrible student when I was there. So.
Right.
So I dropped out after just a little bit less than 2.5 years under both academic and disciplinary probation. So that was my double major, was academic and disciplinary probation. But I started out as a French major because my mother was a French teacher. That seemed like a fun thing to do. And then I was an English major until I had to read Beowulf. And then I was what else? Jesus, I was a government major. And then finally I decided to be a music major because if I couldn't enjoy that, then I clearly didn't belong in school. And it turned out that I clearly didn't belong in school. So
I want to read you this quote from a cat. You probably have crossed paths with him. His name is Paul Leonard. He said, he wound up on a scholarship at Columbia in New York City. Coming from Pittsburgh, the whole world opened up to me. I played ball for about 2 years and injured my knee, and that was the end of that. I remember seeing Allen Ginsberg walking across campus for the first time with a full beard, a 3-piece suit, and red sneakers. I remember going with a guitar friend of mine to see the Doors at a club called Ondine under the 59th Street Bridge. There was nobody in the room. It was the two of us at midnight. Another time I went to the Cheetah and the Grateful Dead were playing. There were maybe 100 people there. When they took a break, Jerry Garcia walked to the bar, and my buddy and I walked over and bought him a beer. I was on the 8th floor of Hamilton Hall at Columbia, and one day I'm walking down the hall, and I hear this guitar music in an adjacent room. Every day I'd walk past his room, and I'd hear the guitar. Turned out it was David Bromberg. He was cutting class.
Right.
Where did you fit? That sounds like right in your pocket of time there.
I started there in 1966, and there was some good music that came to Columbia. The Mothers of Invention played there.
In 66? Wow.
Yeah, the Grateful Dead played a free concert in the middle of the campus quadrangle.
Wow. So can you talk a little bit about, I mean, ultimately you were not a great student, but the distractions of the culture were everywhere. I mean, where
Yeah.
Who did you meet at Columbia that ultimately led you into, or did you meet cats at Columbia that led you into Sha Na Na?
Well, I was in an a cappella group called the Columbia Kingsmen, which is sort of like the chess club. You come in
This
as a
is
freshman
fantastic.
and
Yeah.
graduate as a senior. And that's what turned into Sha Na Na. And basically what happened is that we decided to do a concert is the wrong word, to do a little show in a cafeteria of 50s style and early 60s style. And unbeknownst to us, the older brother of one of the guys in the group went around to a bunch of the fraternity houses where the athletes lived.
Sure.
And even at Columbia, these, very big people. And he went around with a leaflet that said 50s concert, come as you were. And pretty much the entire football team showed up, dressed like 50s hoodlums and very drunk and very scary and very belligerent. And that's where the idea sort of came from, which is let's take this music and let's put what those guys were like in the audience, let's stage that. And so that was the initial concept.
So getting past did you wind up getting other like coffee house gigs, or can you talk a little bit?
No, this happened really quickly. We did 2 or 3 shows in the spring on campus, for gradually bigger and bigger audiences.
Unbelievable.
And then we decided, hey, let's be musicians for the summer. Like, that will be our summer job rather than going home and washing cars or whatever we would have been doing. And let's be musicians for the summer. And we went around and talked ourselves into a bunch of clubs. And one of them was a place called Steve Paul's The Scene.
Wow,
on
yeah,
48th
absolutely.
Street and 8th Avenue. None of us had a clue. I'd been there once to see the Blues Project. But I had no idea that it was sort of a late night hangout for big time musicians and their friends and A&R people and stuff. So we played there for 2 weeks, and Jimi Hendrix was there every night. And I remember one evening, I was just sort of learning how to play the electric guitar and not very comfortable with it, so mostly looking down.
Right.
And I remember looking out, and there was a woman standing on, one of these little round bar stools, jumping up and down and ripping at her hair and screaming like we were the Beatles. And I squinted and I went, holy shit, that's Janis Joplin.
Oh, my God.
And it was. And Eric Clapton was there, and, they started telling their friends and their managers, and all of a sudden there was just, every night there'd be this outpouring of heavy people from the music business there. And one of Bill Graham's people came and booked us into the Fillmore, and somebody from William Morris came down, and all of a sudden they were our agents. And, I think either Michael Lang or Artie Kornfeld came down. And
yeah, I'll talk to Artie about that. Wait, hold on. You're glossing over this. What was it that made you guys separate? I mean, the bills that you were on at the Fillmore, for instance, I mean, what made you different than, psychedelic skiffle bands? I mean, clearly it was the vocal stuff, but were you basically just sort of, you weren't trying to make hits, right? I mean, it just kind of came.
No, what we were trying to do was serve people up a version of the 50s, which was like a little hype, a little bit hyped up, and sort of give them the songs the way they remembered them, maybe more than the way they really were, and with just a very high energy, frenetic show.
So when you say a little more hyped up, just by energy, or because it was like
energy, yeah. And like the tempos were sped up, and we had like 3 guys in gold lame suits dancing. I mean, it was just for 1969. It was insane.
This is blowing my mind. I mean, so were you on with like Iron Butterfly? Like, what were some of the like the Fillmore in New York? I mean,
the first time we played the Fillmore, Ken Heat was headline.
Oh my God!
And Three Dog Night was the support band, and Santana opened the shows. It was their first time in New York, and their first album had just come out.
Wow!
And it was going to be a number 1 album a few months later, but at that point, nobody really heard of them. And the first night we went on second. And the second night, Three Dog Night realized they really shouldn't follow us. And so we went on third. And the second night, I remember Ken Heat came out and said, how do you follow, to the audience, how do you follow that?
That is remarkable.
Yeah, we're going to play a couple of songs and then we're going to get off. How can you possibly follow that? So that's pretty crazy. This is a band that's at this point has been together for 3 months.
I want to know the original members of. I'm looking here. Tell me the original members of the group.
Okay, well, it's 12 of us, so let me see if I can do it.
I'm looking at it, so this is a challenge. I'm looking at him, so I'll help you if you need it. Yeah.
So Rob Leonard.
Yep.
Who was a guy in gold lame suit, who ended up as a linguistics professor at Howard.
Lead vocals on Teen Angel, yeah.
Yeah. Scott Powell,
right,
who is now a orthopedic surgeon in Los Angeles.
Oh, my God.
And if I'm not
genius cats, man. Everybody in this band.
Yeah. A guy named Denny Green, now passed away, who ended up as a law professor. Okay, so there's that 3. So then there's me as 4. Bruce Clark was the bass player, who's a English professor at University of Texas, El Paso, maybe?
Holy cow. Currently?
Currently.
Oh, my God. Unbelievable.
Joe Whitkin was the keyboard player, who's now a retired emergency room doctor. How are we doing here?
Dude, you're doing fantastic. First of all, you haven't
drummer.
mentioned my dear friend who I just did my second interview with, and he also sends his love, is Henry Gross.
Oh, Henry Gross. Well, Henry, of course, is still a musician.
He's still rocking.
And still rocking. And after I quit playing with Sha Na Na, I played with him for about a year.
Wow. I'm going to help you out here. Alan Cooper.
Alan Cooper quit to go to Yale Divinity School.
Dude,
And
what is going on?
The last time I talked to him was a Old Testament scholar and a religion professor at the Union Theological Seminary and the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York City.
Oh, my God.
And who else we got?
We got Marcelino, dude.
Jocko is still a musician.
Dude.
Donnie York,
Joe Whitkin.
Yeah, Joe Whitkin is was an emergency room doctor.
Oh, that's right. Whitkin was emergency room. Richard Jaffe.
Richard Jaffe's a now retired lawyer in New York. And Dave Garrett. Oh, this is a good story. Dave Garrett's father knew somebody at William Morris. I think we were neighbors or something.
Right.
And asked him to, send somebody down to see us at this club, The Scene. And we met in an alley behind the club between sets. And we had just completely knocked the place out. So there's Hendrix and Janis Joplin, all these people screaming, people, offering us record deals on the spot.
Unbelievable.
And this agent looks at us and says, "Gentlemen, I have nothing but bad news for you," and proceeds to tell us why there's no chance we're going to succeed.
What did he say?
And just, you
got legendary, already established musicians going nuts, but he's like being a wet blanket.
And he's just like this stone face.
Yeah.
There's no way. You should just forget about it. So cut to like about 20 years later, and Dave Garrett's father is dying, and has his son come in to see him and says, "Dave, I have a confession to make. It's that when I sent, when I had Nat Lefkowitz send somebody down to see you guys play,
right.
I asked him, send one of your agents down and tell them, that nothing's going to happen, because I didn't want you to be a rock and roll musician. I wanted you to come and work in my company."
Wow. What did Garrett stayed as a musician, or what did he wind up doing?
No, he left after about a year to go work with his father and became a very successful entrepreneur.
Wow, dude, he had a confession.
Isn't that crazy?
That's like insane.
A deathbed confession.
I mean, that's the way it probably should be done. I mean, it's so. What? Tell me a little bit about. First of all, are you going to tell me that all of you guys were at Columbia, or did you just sort of meet
everybody but Henry?
So there was clearly a lot of charisma, bravado, intelligence, street smarts. Obviously, you were like, okay, thanks, dude. Thanks for the information. But what was your next step after that? I mean, he clearly didn't want. He was trying to just give you guys, just totally.
Yeah, but I mean, they came back the next night, and there was just at some point there was no denying what was going on. So William Morris ended up being our agency.
This is really, I'm just going to.
So anyway, this is like what's going on is, from our perspective, seems like it's making some sense, but it's totally crazy.
It's insane.
We had no experience. Hardly anybody had ever played in a band before. There we are, all of a sudden. The idea when you're playing live is you start in clubs, and then you get some experience, and you start to understand how to project a club with 100 people in it, and then you do that for a couple of years, and then you graduate at some point to 1,000-seaters or 2,000-seaters, and you learn how to, be on stage in an audience that big. And then after a while, if you're good enough, you sell enough records, you learn how to be a legitimate headliner and how to play well in front of a lot of people. We just did it overnight. Boom.
You went from club dates to stadiums, basically.
Yeah, we went to club dates to playing in Woodstock, and I don't know, we went to, hey, let's put this together for one night, to Woodstock in 4 months.
Hey, let's just do this for fun in one night, and then you're in Woodstock. Jimmy was a doo-wop fanatic. Was it that? I just want to be very clear. I am not an aficionado of Sha Na Na. Even though you sold...
No, you don't have to be.
Yeah, but I'm trying to figure out, it's just so fascinating because you talk about... I love the story about Three Dog Night being like, we should not follow them, and Cahn Heat's like, probably just play a couple tunes and get out of here. And that blew me away because the only time that Billy Cobham told me that with the Mahavishnu Orchestra, which is, a total instrumental band, nobody wanted to close for them. Guys like Zappa would not do it. A lot of ego involved. They didn't want to be embarrassed. There were only two cats that would open and close for the Mahavishnu Orchestra. One was Edgar Winter's White Trash. He was also at Woodstock. And the other one was Solo Taj, telling stories and playing dobro. So, I'm trying to figure out what it was, and I'd like you to talk to younger generations as well. What was so mind-blowing about Sha Na Na that intimidated the crap out of pretty legitimate rock and blues bands?
Well, look, first of all, what we were doing, although it sounds kind of cheesy and silly, in 1969 was kind of revolutionary.
Well, okay, let's talk about that. What was revolutionary at that time?
Well, the idea of doing everybody in the music business certainly was trying to forget that the 1950s ever happened.
Right, I dig.
Musically and sociologically.
Right, absolutely sociologically, yes.
Yeah, this is right in the middle of the Vietnam War. There's, the civil rights movement is totally blowing up. There's riots in the streets in 1968, riots in Chicago. There have been all of these political assassinations. Things are heavily heated politically. And all of a sudden, here's this group coming out dressed like people from 15 years before that. And, doing something totally unexpected, singing songs that, I remember the first time we played Teen Angel at the Fillmore, there were just these I was looking at the faces out there and just slack-jawed disbelief at first. I can't believe they're doing that.
So I want to be clear. It was danceable music. You guys were good-looking cats with very flashy dress, singing about a time that was basically people thought was dead and buried, but doing it in a very hip kind of way.
Yeah, and for people like Jimmy and Janice and Jerry Garcia and all of these musicians that were much better musicians than we ever were, just loving us because it was the music that they grew up on. And everybody loves the music they grew up on. It doesn't matter whether it's, somebody my age or somebody, 30 years younger listening to NWA. It's just the music that people grew up on. It has an enormous emotional attraction.
But at no time, so you guys were having talks about you weren't into having a nostalgia trip. You wanted to put something contemporary on it, but at least the messages in the songs harken back to that time. Is that you weren't doing? Yeah, you weren't doing covers of 50s tunes.
No, we were doing covers of 50s tunes.
Oh my God, this is so beyond. This is so legendary.
We were staging it with something else, So it was always sort of treading the line between homage and adoration on the one hand and poking fun on the other hand.
Yeah, I can see why all those cats like Janice and Jerry, man, they must have just eaten it up. And beyond that, they just were there songs that you would leave the head of the tune and Jocko. Basically, you guys was there times for people to stretch out and riff, or were you basically playing?
No, everything was like very, very tight.
This is so classic. So you were doing like 3 or 4 minute things,
and like one after another, with hardly a word in between. So one of the things, so there was this older brother of one of the guys in the group who was a graduate student in theater and had all these ideas about how you entertain.
Right.
And I remember he had these little homilies, and one of them was, I can't believe it, this is 54 years now ago, and I still remember this. One of them was the distinction between Cantonese food and Japanese food.
Cantonese and Japanese? That's a pretty...
Yes, and his notion was that Cantonese food, like all of the dishes, who knows whether this is true or not, but this is how he presented it, that all of the dishes have a very similar taste and texture. And you can sort of throw them together and they work very well together. Japanese food, on the other hand, everything has a different texture, a different taste, a different feel, a different look. So we were going to be more like Japanese food than Cantonese food. And so every song, there would be changes in the way that we would look. There would be different lineups. Somebody else would come out and sing. Just we're constantly in motion.
Interesting. That's fast. So it was almost like you had a deep bench. I mean, you were bringing cats out. It was just a revolving door of musicians. There was no real...
Yeah. I mean, it's like nobody would ever sing lead on 2 songs in a row.
Would people sing lead on different tunes each night, or people generally had their own?
No, there were just people sang leads on the same songs every night.
Right.
And we're just and the idea was that you weren't allowed to sing from behind an instrument. So Jocko, for example, would come up and sing a couple of songs a night, and someone else would go play the drums, and somebody else would move over. Like the pianist would play the drums, and someone would go over and play the piano.
This is, you definitely weren't Cantonese food. Much more.
No. Yeah. And we would rehearse entire sets from the moment we came out to the moment we left. We would just run the whole thing. How quickly did you guys become, I don't want to say stars, but like, I've just seen, when I've talked to Larry Coryell, rest in peace, Michael Shreve, a lot of these guys, they were seeing a lot of their friends get very wealthy overnight and become sort of get caught up in the excesses of that quote unquote rock star life, and they saw a lot of their friends being roadkill. I just wonder how you dealt with fame. I mean, it's a very fascinating thing because after Sha Na Na, Elliot Cahn, it was lawyer time, pretty much, Like, yeah, it took a while.
It did take, no, I'm saying, but it's just, can you talk, how long did the disbelief, I think it's good to be in shock and disbelief, but when that wore off and you guys started to make a lot of dough,
first of all, we never made a lot of dough.
You never made it because there were too many cats in the band, right?
12 people in the group, and we didn't write our own songs.
Dude, this is sick. You were getting a little bit of money for the gig, and that was it. I love it.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And everybody else but me was still going to college.
This is insane.
I remember one particular evening at the Fillmore West, there was like one big dressing room that everybody shared. And then, sort of little places to change.
Sure.
And I remember like all sorts of debauchery going on in this room. And my guys were like hunkering down, busy studying Kierkegaard because they had to fly back.
They're trying to pass the final exam.
Final exams, yeah.
Oh my. So there was no, explain the situation. You never got like super wealthy, but you guys were living, the cost of living was not that intense back then. So you must have been doing okay.
We're doing okay, but not making very much, but living the dream for sure.
Living the dream. Did you feel, Can you talk about? I mean, I know like Sly Stone went on at Woodstock at like 3 in the morning, and there were cats like holding up the floorboards so they wouldn't because there was a monsoon that came in that night, and a lot of Santana. The weather held up, and quite frankly, that kind of put Santana. No one had ever. People were hip to Afro-Cuban jazz. They had never really heard Latin rock before.
I'll tell you about our Woodstock experience because it was not what we expected. So we were supposed to go on Sunday afternoon right after Joe Cocker played. And I remember getting to the Performers Hotel on Saturday morning, about 9 o'clock in the morning, and crazy scene, as you can imagine. And, just a ton of musicians and a ton of their friends and a bunch of Hell's Angels. And there was a very straight-laced wedding at this hotel that had been booked long before Woodstock was on the map. And the Angels decided that they should all kiss the bride.
Oh, no.
And who was to say no,
Oh, my, no one's going to stop
If anybody had said no, Altamont would have happened, a month earlier.
That's right.
So there was all this craziness, and they had messed up the hotel reservations and didn't have our hotel rooms. However, there were a bunch of musicians who were trapped at the site, which was probably 10 miles away, and couldn't get back to their hotels. So they put us up in hotel rooms, and I remember my girlfriend and I were put in Grace Slick and Paul Kantner's room. And Suzanne, my old girlfriend, spent most of the evening trying on Grace Slick's outfits.
I don't blame her.
Which were great. So in any case, they flew us in on Sunday morning. Cocker played, destroyed the place, just epic performance. And it started raining. And it rained for several hours. They shut the festival down for a while. And then they started up finally, probably early evening as it was getting dark. And, no, you're not going on next. Whoever it is, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young want to go on. So they went on. You're going on after them. And then it was, no, you're not going after them. Blood, Sweat, and Tears wants to go on. Whoever it was, there was this long line of artists that wanted to go home. And who the hell was Sha Na Na to, say no? So we kept getting pushed back and back and back and back and back. I was on the side of the stage. I mean, I got a chance to stand about 10 feet from Steve Stills when Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young were playing, which was pretty fucking cool.
Unreal.
So finally, it was what was left was us and Jimi Hendrix. And I would imagine that Jimmy's agents probably fought to get him to close the festival because it seemed like a great idea at the time. But not such a great idea when, we got weather like that.
After 4 days of insanity, yeah.
So it was him and us, and if he had decided to be a dick, he would have gone on, and we probably never would have gone on. But, he was nice enough, and we'd been hanging out with him for 2 weeks at this club in New York. So it's not like we were best friends or anything, but we knew each other and liked each other. And he was nice enough to say, hey, let me go on. So I think the sun was coming up just about the time we got on stage. And I remember I looked out and there was nobody there. It's not like there was nobody there, but...
Well, it was... so this was already Monday morning.
It's Monday morning. And if you remember the scenes from the Woodstock album of Jimmy playing to a hill of mud and nobody there, that's basically what we played to. So I was just completely crushed. Because this was our big chance to go from, a club band that a couple hundred people had ever heard of to, to something significant. And it was, completely screwed by the weather. So we sounded horrible. We'd been up all night, voices ravaged. And we played for, 30 or 40 minutes and got off. And I was just inconsolably bummed until I started hearing about what Woodstock was beginning to mean as an event. And then I got gradually less bummed, and then the movie came out, and all of a sudden, what had seemed like a disaster was actually a triumph. I just didn't realize it at the time.
Well, We're gonna have to do set 2, man, because we've already been cooking for 50 minutes here, and we have a lot. But okay, so to me, you were bummed because you wanted to play to legions of people. I mean, you wanted to rock, but but how quickly was it evident that I mean, we didn't have the internet. There was no instantaneous information. What was? I mean, it sounds obvious, but it really isn't now because the second Woodstock was such a disaster. What was? I mean, I just talked to Wavy Gravy this morning. What was the significance? How quickly did you learn and start to feel that this was a cosmic, social, significant event?
In the car on the way home.
Oh my! Like it was on the radio. People were talking.
Oh yeah, it was the lead story all over the country, and it was the lead story in the newspapers, and it kept being for several days after that.
Wow!
And
wow!
No, it was big stuff, and then the movie came out, and then it was cemented. And all these years later, both of my daughters watched the movie in their 8th grade American history class.
Is Sha Na Na featured in the movie? Were the film running at that time, or were they?
Yeah.
And so you guys are part.
The way we heard the story, I mean, there are a lot of artists, way bigger than we ever were, who didn't end up in the movie, and some of them for financial reasons. They wanted to get paid well, and they were only offering union scale. And some of them because the movie was just too damn long. And we were, from what I was told, we were going to get cut. And they started showing different versions to focus groups. And, our little segment went over extremely well, and they decided to keep us in.
Oh, Mike, dude, you didn't clam it up that bad, obviously. They got the good part.
Yeah.
That's so beautiful, man. And so your daughters get to watch that movie in their 8th grade history class?
Yeah.
Oh, my God. So this was being covered on the 3 major networks for several days after this.
Yeah.
On TV.
And the funny thing is that there were a lot of festivals that year and the year before and the year after. And I remember I moved about a year ago, and I was going through some old memorabilia, and I came upon the program when we played the Fillmore, which was, 2 or 3 weeks, 4 weeks before Woodstock.
Yeah.
And I was just sort of thumbing through it, and there was an advertisement for the Atlantic City Pop Festival in 1969. And I looked at the roster of artists playing, and it's virtually identical to the roster at Woodstock. Maybe 2 or 3 differences. And who the hell even remembers that there was a 1969 Atlantic City Pop Festival, much less that it had any significance? So basically the same artists, and one of them, disappears from consciousness, and the other one becomes a cultural icon 50 some odd years later.
Yeah, I think so. It was the Atlantic City Pop Fest was multi-day. I can't see. There was no way. So that nobody remembers that. I mean, I just think the insanity of having no real security. The people were just so even through all the horrible weather and insanity. I mean, pretty well behaved. And then you just looking back on it, having so many incredible artists showing up. It's just it seems so innocent, and yet it was one of the cultural. I think of like Isle of Wight. I'm not sure if what other festivals did you guys play? Any other festivals in your career with Sha Na Na that were memorable?
Like as a one-time thing that just
sort of just out? Like before. Yeah, I mean, as outside of Woodstock, I have to believe you probably. Well, first of all, did you have a record deal at that point? I guess you must have.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
But you would say that.
But we didn't have a record out yet. We were still in the process. We just started recording what was to be our first album.
All right, so let's put a button in this. Let's set up a time to do set 2. It's such an honor to talk to you, man.
I'm chuckling. Thank you very much for saying that.
Hey, man, it was a ball, man. We'll do it again.
Good. You got it.
All right, Elliot. Cheers, man.
Bye.
Bye.